In 1931, the same year Universal Pictures released Dracula and Frankenstein to theaters and Dick Tracy made his comic strip debut, 18-year-old high school dropout and animator Bob Clampett had a crazy dream. At the time, working for $10 a week as an assistant at Warner Brothers, helping develop their burgeoning Looney Tunes, Clampett had loftier ambitions. Despite his young age and relative inexperience in the field, he approached legendary author and Tarzan creator Edgar Rice Burroughs, asking for permission to direct an animated feature adaptation of another popular Burroughs character, John Carter of Mars. The Tales of John Carter, initially published as a series of serialized adventures in 1912 and later collected as 11 novels, concern a Virginian Civil War veteran who mysteriously finds himself transported to the Red Planet. Symbolically adopted by a race of six-limbed, green-skinned warrior aliens known as Tharks, Carter finds love with Dejah Thoris, the princess of a red-skinned humanoid race of Martians, and eventually becomes an unlikely hero on his newly adopted planet of Mars, or, as the natives call it, Barsoom. Burroughs was impressed by young Clampett's enthusiasm for the character and signed off on the animated project. But while the test footage Clampett would create over the next few years would impress studio heads at MGM, American theater owners were less excited, not convinced audiences of the day were ready for such bizarre space adventures. With dwindling support from the studio, Clampett had no choice but to abandon the project in 1936. Clampett would go on to become a legendary figure in the animation field thanks to his work on Looney Tunes and later as the creator of Beanie and Cecil, but still, it's hard not to think of what could have been. Had he been allowed to finish his John Carter, it's possible it would have preceded Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as the first American feature-length animated film. What makes the failure of the project sting even more is that, in 1936, the same year theaters told Clampett America wasn't ready for John Carter, MGM, who, don't forget, passed on Clampett's film, released a highly successful live-action serial adaptation of Flash Gordon, a popular sci-fi comic strip initially created when its publishers were themselves unable to secure the rights to the John Carter character. This would sadly become the ongoing story of potential John Carter adaptations. Burroughs' character would remain immensely popular with sci-fi and fantasy fans around the world, and would influence and inspire a number of properties that would go on to television and movie success: Buck Rogers, Superman, Dune, and Star Wars, to name a few. But a pure adaptation of John Carter would continuously fail to happen. Not for lack of trying, though. Famed stop-motion animator Ray Harryhausen flirted with a potential Carter film in the 50s. Walt Disney pursued an initial attempt at the property as a star vehicle for Tom Cruise in the 80s. And in the early 2000s, a Paramount Pictures developed version of John Carter would see directors Robert Rodriguez, Cary Conran, and Jon Favreau all sign on, and just as quickly drop out. John Carter finally got his first movie in 2009, not from Disney, not from Paramount, but from The Asylum, a low-budget studio that, until the surprise success of their Sharknado franchise, was best known for its mockbusters such as Transmorphers, Snakes on a Train, and The Day the Earth Stopped. Princess of Mars, named after the first novel in Burroughs' series and starring Antonio Sabato Jr. as Carter and Tracy Lords as Dejah Thoris, was presented as their mockbuster of Avatar, a film which James Cameron publicly admitted was heavily influenced by John Carter. There's a sad irony to John Carter's first cinematic adventure being sold as a rip-off of a movie his stories inspired. And on top of that, this micro-budget straight-to-video affair was hardly the adaptation Burroughs fans had been waiting for, thanks to its Halloween mask-quality Tharks, alien locales that look suspiciously like high school boiler rooms, and a John Carter that sports a tramp stamp. Thankfully, the property would get a chance at redemption just a few years later, when, on the 100th anniversary of Burroughs' first John Carter of Mars story, a new, mega-budget, big-screen adaptation would finally be unleashed on the world. This version would be helmed by a popular, critically acclaimed filmmaker, and produced by the most successful movie studio in the world. Nothing could go wrong this time, right? The year is 2012, and Walt Disney Studios is ready to launch their next big franchise, John Carter. welcome to Failure the Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
I'm Chris.
You are Chris of Earth?
Oh my god, that's how we're going to start it?
I mean, come on, we got to get in the spirit here,
We actually should have just waited to the end to say that.
Well, you're probably right.
Yeah.
Give you a fancy little logo that's not actually indicative of the title of the
yeah,
film.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So as you heard in the little intro there, we are starting this off, our first episode, with quite a doozy. I think when we came up with the idea for this podcast, there was never any question to me of what film to start with for a variety of reasons. I think, first of all, it is very interesting that there's a lot of movies you and I have already talked about doing.
Yeah.
But none of them have a history of taking 100 years to get to the big screen, so that alone is quite unique.
And none of them also, I think, failed as historically bad as this one did.
Yeah,
and
that's the thing. I think of the last 10 years, I think when people think of a potential franchise starter that really fell on its face, this is kind of like the primo example.
Yeah, you don't want to John Carter your movie. It just
right.
became that.
Mm-hmm. So it's like we're going to try very hard to not John Carter this podcast, because who knows? This is technically, we did the episode 0, but this is our first one. If we never record another one after this, ironically, we would become the very thing we are talking about.
With the very thing we hate the most.
So hopefully we don't lose lots of money on this first episode.
Yeah, exactly. So far we put in a month of subscription, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So yes, as we said, we are talking about 2012's John Carter today from Walt Disney Studios. And so we just wanted to start talking about what were they thinking, right? Why did this film happen?
Mm-hmm.
What's the backstory? What led into the version of the film we ultimately saw? As you heard in the introduction, there were a lot of versions of this movie that almost happened over the years, which is understandable considering it is this very important, influential sci-fi text. And I guess I could just start, before we even talk about like this iteration of it, just asking you, Chris, like before the movie even came out, did you have any awareness of John Carter as a property?
Less than zero, I would say. Like it was completely off of my radar, and I didn't even know that it had kind of an anthology of books. Well, not an anthology, but like a series of books and stories, let alone just one-off. So yeah, no, absolutely in the dark. I assume you not as much, though. You are an avid reader. So yeah.
But I could only say that I had a little bit more knowledge than you. I had an awareness of it simply because, obviously, when you talk about Edgar Rice Burroughs, more people know Tarzan. That's his most famous character, and I was certainly aware of that. And in reading about Edgar Rice Burroughs in the past, I'd certainly seen in passing this idea of his other popular character, John Carter of Mars. And maybe I'd heard little things here and there about how that's the story that inspired all this stuff. But I certainly did not read these books until I was going to say the hype for this movie, but there was never hype for this movie. But until like the wheels were in motion on this film getting closer to coming out, I decided to pick up, some of these books and read them. And that was really like my first introduction into that world. And I asked that question for a reason, because a lot of the discussion here today is going to be about how much of audience awareness was there really about this property, and how much should Disney and Andrew Stanton have assumed about what the audience knew about it. But obviously, a lot of important people in the film industry knew about it because, as we said, multiple attempts made at it. Of the ones we know about, right? The Bob Clampett animated version, the Tom Cruise, John McTiernan directed version in the 80s.
That was so. By the way, that to me was unbelievable. I had never even heard of that, and I'm an avid. Like Tom Cruise is to me, he's the last great movie star, and I feel like I know his filmography and what he's been a part of, or even talked of being a part of forever. But to hear that he was possibly going to be John Carter was pretty astounding. Very, the most surprising in all the research was that.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. Like, so now that you've done a little bit of research and listened to, not only heard my intro, but I'm sure you did your own kind of research. At least I hope you did. You didn't let me down. Yeah. But are there any of those versions that didn't happen that you kind of especially wish you would have seen? Or,
well, in a weird way, like again, like you had mentioned too, Jon Favreau as being a part of it, and I think Jon Favreau has really proved himself over the last few years as always kind of having a vision for high concept fantasy. Definitely loving it. So I think, a Jon Favreau version would have been awesome, I think.
Here's the really interesting thing about that, because one of the things we like to talk about in the show is what could have been, and that will come later for us on this movie. But oddly enough, on the what could have been if the Jon Favreau John Carter had happened, I didn't mention this in the intro, but when he decided to leave John Carter because just things weren't progressing, him and the screenwriter that had been primarily working with him, they went directly from that into Iron Man.
Oh,
so if they had done John Carter, it's very likely they would not have been available to do Iron Man. And then now your mind boggles, right? Because now you're talking about an entirely different cinematic world.
Well, it's funny you say that too, because again, I had some thoughts on what could have been as well. But in a weird way, like before in the history of Disney, obviously gearing up to create a bunch of franchises right now. Like in the time period of John Carter came out in 2012, and didn't they buy Marvel in like 2010 or something?
Yeah.
So
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then Star Wars right after John Carter had come out, or right before. But it's just it's interesting to see the landscape would have changed entirely. Yeah, the Jon Favreau one would be the most exciting for me, honest to God. I love Tom Cruise, but I think he's been miscast in a few things. As much as I love the guy, the Robert Rodriguez may have been too out to left field.
That one was definitely like their idea with the Robert Rodriguez one, and the reason they hired him was to give it that same kind of visual approach that he had already used on Sin City, right? So it was really going to be all kind of animated backgrounds and, primarily a green screen film. So you understood why they went for him in that version. And then they made a point of saying Kerry Conran was barely on it, but he's the guy that did Sky Captain. So I'm sure that was a continuation of the idea.
Oh, yeah.
But he quickly left. And then when Jon Favreau came on, they said Jon Favreau really pushed before more of a mix of more practical effects and on-location shooting, which obviously then Stanton believed in as well.
Yeah.
I think for me, the version I kind of bemoan not seeing is Ray Harryhausen doing a version in the 50s with like that stop motion animation. I just think of like the kind of films Ray Harryhausen was making back then, and a John Carter, since it's such a pulp property, it just seems like it fits right into that wheelhouse.
Oh, you can absolutely just kind of almost see the stop motion aliens in the form of the stop motion skeletons. All the famous. Yeah. Like it's just perfect. It's a perfect blend.
And it seems, in retrospect, very sad that that's the version that didn't happen, because it's so surprising to me that it didn't, because that's the period where you would have thought, there were like in the 40s and 50s, so much America just seemed more into sci-fi, and like in a way where those kind of like pulp novels were still very popular. Sci-fi hadn't really become the nerdy thing yet, right, in the same way that it would become throughout the 70s and 80s. And even into the 90s, it was always, if you were a sci-fi fan, you were kind of the nerd, right?
Definitely.
Before, they've had sci-fi just completely take over the entertainment landscape.
Well, the sci-fi landscape really hit like when Star Wars was coming out, right? Like,
right.
And even still, I would say, Star Wars I consider more fantasy, but it definitely, when that happened, the ships, the lasers, it seemed cool at that point.
Yeah, and then so you already kind of mentioned this, but it is interesting that one of the things that sticks out about this film is it is kind of the last remnant of a certain era of Disney, right? This is
absolutely
perhaps this and Lone Ranger, but even Lone Ranger was kind of a more known property. But this is really like the end of Disney trying to still create its own franchises from the ground up,
create their own franchise, and also do it in an incredibly classic filmmaking way.
Right.
Like on set, on location, that sort of thing. It feels very, and we'll get into that in a bit, but it just feels very, very classic. Mm-hmm. Like out of time. Like it shouldn't have come out in 2012 in a weird way.
Yeah. Yeah, and so when we talk about like why, what were they thinking? So let's consider this. So in the wake of the Paramount project falling apart, the rights actually reverted back to the Edgar Rice Burroughs estate. Mm-hmm. And they had him for a bit. And that was when Disney gets back involved at that point. And specifically, they get back involved because Andrew Stanton finds out that the rights have left Paramount. And he loved these books as a kid. Right. And when he was a kid, he just always said, like, man, if I ever become a filmmaker, this is what I want to do, is John Carter. So he's coming hot off of the success of Finding Nemo and WALL-E. He's one of the top kind of Pixar guys. And he essentially goes to Disney and makes a pitch saying, can you get these rights for me? And I want to do this as like my live action debut. And this begins the dominoes of everything, both good and bad, right? About how this project progresses, because since he is so important to Disney and because he's had these two massive successes in an animated field, they decide like, yeah, okay, well, we'll take a shot on this. And, obviously Disney has thought about John Carter in the past. So it's something that's kind of hung around in the studio in a certain way before. And they decide to move ahead.
And they give him kind of free reign, right? Like, it even sounds like they gave him a lot of free reign to the marketing.
Yeah, we'll certainly come back and discuss that, because he gets a lot of free reign with this. Right. And then as the movie kind of starts coming together, other elements, why did it happen? So we should probably talk about the Taylor kitsch of it all. Mm-hmm. Because why? So that's probably a question that hovers over this. For a movie this large and with a budget this big, which we'll discuss, and so much obviously at stake, why Taylor kitsch? And people might look back at that now and just be so confused. But let me just throw out why I think that happened. Because this is something you see happen in Hollywood occasionally. Every few years, Hollywood gets a bug up its butt about making some newcomer like the next big thing, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In my lifetime, I've seen it happen with Josh Lucas. I've seen it happen with Taylor Kitsch. I've seen it happen with Sam Worthington. Yep. Remember that right when he was doing Avatar, he also got signed onto the new Terminator film. In recent years, you've seen it happen with like Garrett Hedlund, Jai Courtney. You just mentioned the thing about Tom Cruise being the last movie star, and I agree. And we're kind of in a post-movie star era. Yeah. But Hollywood hasn't necessarily gotten that memo yet.
No,
and they become very obsessed with trying to elevate people very quickly at certain times. And when you talk about Taylor Kitsch, people have to remember that in 2012, so in 2011, Friday Night Lights, the NBC show, ends. And that's what he was primarily known for. He had played Tim Riggins on that show, the fullback of the team, the high school football team that the show's about. I don't know if you ever watched the show, but it's great. It's one of the it's like one of the defining shows of the beginning of the golden age of TV, as people talk about. Mm-hmm. And he was really good on it. That character got a lot of acclaim. People loved it. So Hollywood was like, that's the guy, right? He's got these kind of rugged good looks. And
his schedule's clearing up.
Yep, the show's done. This is the perfect time to transition him into Hollywood. And sure, sometimes this has worked in the past, but so he right off the bat he gets two big leading roles in two big studio films. John Carter for Disney and Battleship for Paramount. And who knows, maybe someday we'll talk about that. And I'm sure he was like riding high, right? Because that's such an ego boost. But the thing is, you really question whenever this doesn't work, you always go back and think, man, was that the best move to take this person who is proved on TV, but not in movies yet, and give him these gigantic lead roles on two giant tentpole pieces, and not just kind of try to start him off more as a leading man in some smaller projects or a supporting role? But that's definitely where they were coming from. I'm sure the studio probably would have preferred a much bigger star. I'm guessing this was Stanton again getting his way.
Hey, and sometimes it works though. Like look at Chris Pratt. Like that's pure. It's almost identical to Chris Pratt's career. He was just this guy in a highly rated TV show, gets Guardians of the Galaxy, gets a Jurassic World, and then boom, boom, he's off to the races.
And that's the thing. That's why sometimes you do just have to roll the dice, because you never know. So then once you have Taylor Kitsch, obviously you want to recapture some of that Wolverine Origins magic.
Oh, yes.
So you go to Lynn Collins as well, because she was in that as well. Yeah. But again, when I said Lynn Collins, I'm guessing the reaction of a lot of our listeners was, who? So the big female lead again goes to not a big star. There's I'm assuming somewhere in Hollywood there's a glass box that says break glass in case of need a villain, and Mark Strong is just sitting inside that.
And you know what, we got into an argument about this a few weeks ago, and I had completely forgot that this guy's in this movie. And immediately I wrote in my notes, Mark Strong, a villain again, have argument with Trev. This is all he does, man.
I'm just saying, if he's played a good guy here and there, right?
Sure.
Kingsman, that's all I can really think of off the top of my head. But,
yeah, okay. Yeah. Barely.
And technically, as I said, he's not a villain in Green Lantern.
Yeah, okay.
All right, just saying.
We might have to discuss that in a later episode.
I think we will, yeah.
Yeah.
So, they assemble this cast of, it's a good cast. You get Willem Dafoe, you get Samantha Morton.
You get Bryan Cranston.
You get Bryan Cranston for one scene.
One scene, like and that was when did Breaking Bad start? That was 2013. Did that? No. That's when it ended, right? So he was in the thick of Breaking Bad at that point.
Let's see here. It was definitely during Breaking Bad. Yeah.
So like, I mean, he's kind of not. I don't want to say peak Bryan Cranston, but just in general, it was pretty. I don't even think he remembers that he's in that movie.
Yeah, Breaking Bad ended in 2013. So this is
there you go.
Right as it was wrapping down.
Wow.
Winding down, I should have said. But I mean, like obviously that's why he was only available for like one scene, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
But I guess like the final point I would make on what were they thinking is just. So you have if you're a studio, right, and this director who does mean a lot to you and has been very successful comes to you and says, "Hey, can we move forward with this property?" And this property does have this kind of really famous pedigree to it. I kind of understand where they're coming from on this one a little bit. There's some questionable elements. This wasn't exactly the kind of film that was popular at the time, but that's the kind of thing that you can overcome with the right stars and with the right marketing. That's where you get into some issues, as we'll discuss. But basically, this is just all a result of Andrew Stanton having so much sway at the studio at this point.
And yeah, I don't blame the choice at all. Why did they make this movie? It's kind of hitting all the bells. They were in need of franchises. They had just bought Marvel. They're looking to really build Disney for now, And
I mean, you look at a property like John Carter with all the characters,
the merchandise.
The merchandise, potential theme park attractions.
Yep.
There's a lot that you can look at and say like, yes, this is this. If this had hit, right, it could have hit big for them.
Huge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's not what happened. Maybe we should talk about what went wrong.
You killed him with one blow. When I saw you, I believed that something new can come into this world.
You are John Carter of Earth?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so here's the plot from IMDb. Transported to Barsoom, a Civil War vet discovers a barren planet seemingly inhabited by 12-foot-tall barbarians. Finding himself prisoner of these creatures, he escapes, only to encounter Wula and a princess in desperate need of a savior. Pretty.
If only it was that
vague.
simple.
Yeah, I'm even reading that. I was like, hold on a second.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is definitely the Cliff Notes version of it. So that's not getting into the fact that he gets involved in this kind of war between these two red-skinned Martian cities on Barsoom, known as Helium and Sodanga. And then, yes, his entire time as a captive and eventually kind of a comrade of the Tharks. There's a lot happening in this movie.
There's just a lot of terminology, and that was actually one of my, I think, issue. To be honest, okay, so right off the bat, I do like this movie. I liked it in theaters. On rewatch, I definitely, especially obviously we're doing a little bit more critique of it. I saw a little bit less of what I liked, if that makes any sense. I just felt in the beginning, it kind of just starts, right? Shows you the title, John Carter. It's very vague. It's nothing. And then it goes right into the visuals of what's going on, and it just throws you in, doesn't hold your hand. But it feels like a movie like this should be holding your hand just a little bit.
It's interesting because it's a movie that's very confident in itself. Right?
Extremely.
It's a very confidently made film, even at times where you wonder if that's the right approach. I'll just get out of the way and say I like this film quite a bit, actually.
Right.
So this is not one I think we're going to be here just to like crap on.
No.
I liked this. I'm actually kind of in a slightly different situation as you, in that I liked it in the theater, and I felt like I liked it even more on this rewatch.
Oh, interesting.
I was kind of even more into it. Now, that's not to say I don't recognize some of the problems. And that's not to say I won't be able to discuss what went wrong, because I think, as I said, I think I said this in the last episode, but there's a tendency in modern film criticism, and when I say modern film criticism, let me be clear, I'm talking mostly about like film Twitter and
Absolutely.
just generalized movie fans. But people who are too quick to say, well, if it's got some flaws, that I'm just going to crap all over it. and be like, no, you can acknowledge that you can see how flawed a film is, but still have fun with it or still overall enjoy it if it's mostly doing what it set out to do, or if there's something about it that speaks to you. And there's a lot about John Carter I really, really like. But I know what you mean about one of the issues with this film is how much it throws at you and how much it's kind of asking you as an audience to take in with not much help from the film. And I especially think about like kids watching this and being like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like,
and like again, like you
slow this down just a bit.
Well, you even said some of the names of things, and it becomes difficult to say. And I know that sounds like a stupid thing to say, but for something like a Star Wars, it's the rebellion, it's the Empire. It's very simple. But mind you, again, it's something like Avatar says some crazy words too. But I guess the different. Oh yeah, I'm jumping a little bit ahead there. In the intro, we had mentioned that Avatar definitely gets some inspiration from this property.
Oh, for sure.
And watching it this time, oh boy, did I see it. The one thing that I think that Avatar succeeds in doing, especially compared to this one, is that you start the movie with Jake Sully, and Jake Sully is going through the entire film with you. Well, I think in the beginning of this, that's a mistake by not having John with you right in the beginning. He doesn't become fish out of water. He doesn't become, you don't involve him in the culture of the movie, the mystical stuff of the movie, the rules of the movie until probably 30 minutes in.
Right.
So it's a little, it just jumps around a little bit in that beginning. That's jarring. For somebody like me, I eat that shit up. Like I love that.
I think jarring is the perfect word because the film starts with a little bit of an introduction on Barsoom with some narration explaining to us the war between these two cities. But then it kind of comes back to Earth. And so already you're kind of thrown off. Yeah. And then we do get a couple scenes with John Carter, but with no kind of explanation of who he is or what he's doing. No. And then really the primary character that we follow for a little bit at this point is Edgar Rice Burroughs, which was, this actually comes right from the books, which in the John Carter novels, Edgar Rice Burroughs does use this framing device where he kind of he sells it as if it's a true story. In the novels, it's not that John Carter is his uncle as it is in the film. It's more just that John Carter is like a family friend. That his family always knew John Carter, but it's the same idea where he says John Carter is this person I knew who went to Mars, had all these adventures, and actually told me about them, and I'm telling you this story that I know. And so I understand why Stanton wanted to bring that in because, and this is something that will come up a lot, Stanton was very adamant about making a very, very accurate adaptation of these books. There are slight changes here and there, but even when we talk about the changes, it's mostly that he brings some elements from later books in early. Like the Therns, the villainous race in this that Mark Strong is a part of, don't show up in the books until book 2. This is primarily an adaptation of book 1, but he decided to introduce them a little early to kind of give the sequel bait, I guess, a little bit more.
That's funny because again, I have no knowledge of even the books, the backstory, what was the differences. But I did think, like you said, this one is pretty well, or pretty close to the first book.
It is pretty close, yeah. And I mean, he makes some good changes because the thing about the books was they were written originally, they were serialized in magazines. So they're kind of told in these episodic chapters that always end on a cliffhanger. So actually, when you read them as a novel, it kind of keeps starting and stopping, and it can be like a kind of a frustrating read in that way if you're not used to that style. And also in the first book, Princess of Mars, which this one is based on, a lot of the page count is just about the trek of when Tars Tarkas has John Carter and Deja Thoris both prisoner, them kind of trekking across the desert. That's like the majority of the book. And I'm glad that's very short in the movie. Yeah. So, he makes some good changes. But to get back to my point, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on this Edgar Rice Burroughs thing, that he clearly wanted to bring it in because he wanted to pay tribute to Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author. He wanted to replicate that framing device, but I don't know if it was necessary.
Yeah, and it's funny also that they cast the Spy Kids kid. And with the history of knowing that Robert Rodriguez was attached, I wanted to bring that up front. As soon as that happened, I was like, oh wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, you wonder if that's like a carryover.
Yeah, totally. One of his ideas, he wrote like little on a napkin. He was like, I should get that kid.
It might actually be, because I don't know if you know this, but Jon Favreau actually plays a Thark in one scene.
Oh, so he does, I didn't know that.
I think maybe Andrew Stanton was trying to pay tribute to some of the people who had come before and made attempts.
Bring the family together.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like when you watch the film, it feels like the Edgar Rice Burroughs thing is in there. Obviously I get why it's in there, but you almost, if you didn't know any better, you'd think it was in there just for that joke at the end when Carter says like maybe try writing a book or something.
Totally.
Like it just feels like that's why they need to have. I don't even know if you'd need him in there as a character.
No, I don't think so either.
And to your point about Avatar, you're right that it takes a bit to even get to Carter getting to Mars. Now there's some good stuff in the lead up to that actually.
Oh, absolutely. I especially loved the editing of him being kind of not a buffoon. That's not what I mean, but kind of that Indiana Jones feel. Like you can punch this guy. You can make him bleed. He's not the best.
I mean, one of the best moments of the movie is before we even get to Mars, and it's when he's a Confederate soldier from the Civil War. The Civil War is now over, and he's kind of just become this surly prospector because, as we will discover, his family was killed while he was away in war, and so he's kind of just nothing left to live for. And the U.S. cavalry catches him, and because he was such a decorated soldier in the war, Bryan Cranston, who is the general of the cavalry here, he wants to kind of like recruit him to fight for him against the Apaches.
Right. And
Carter makes a point of saying like, I have nothing against the Apaches. They've done nothing to me. I don't want any part of your war. I've already fought a war and lost everything. But the scene where he just keeps escaping over and over is like one of the best parts of the film. Like it's played very well. That's actually that has like that Pixar editing to it, right? Where you feel Stanton bringing that animation humor into this live action piece.
It's funny you say that because actually I wrote that down as soon as he gets to Mars, when he's learning about his gravity, that is from an animator's mind.
For sure.
Absolutely. Like, it is so brilliantly done. It's simple. It's hilarious. It's very elegant. You know right away that he's like, oh, the gravity's not working. He's not used to it or something's up. And the acting is great. Everything about that scene is that's an animator. 1000%. It was, I love that you brought that up because I was just totally on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's definitely sequences. There's quite a few sequences like that where you can see how Stanton's bringing the experience and his visual sense from his previous films into this. But pacing is certainly an issue throughout the film for sure. We're talking about a runtime of 132 minutes, and I'm not going to lie, it feels longer when you're watching it.
Absolutely. And especially at home. I wanted to make sure, you put your phone away, you put everything away, you want to stay true to the film, but it starts to drag. Especially when it gets into the gobbledygook of the terms, the terminology, again, because it's not holding your hand whatsoever. So you really have to pay attention to how like Tars Tarkum, like am I even saying it right? Tars Tarkus. Yeah. Difficult.
I'm gonna try one more time. Tars Tarkus.
Like baby.
Just say Willem Dafoe.
Willem, totally, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why all the characters in here I started just like writing their normal names down.
I'd also say, I don't know if you agree, it's the odd kind of big epic adventure film that I actually think is pretty front-loaded with most of the good stuff. In that I feel personally, and maybe this is because it's more indicative of like the actual source material, but I'm a little bit more into the film during that first half when it's more about him dealing with the Tharks and being captured by them, and trying to get away and everything with Woola. And then once you kind of get bogged down in the politics of Helium versus Zedanga, that's when you can feel your eyes start to glaze over in certain sequences. Yeah.
And the fun thing about him and the Tharks are it's very Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, it's way more fish out of water.
It all takes place in a desert, right? So it looks like Planet of the Apes. It feels like Planet of the Apes. It's I wrote down about the score. The score is by Michael Giacchino, and I'm a huge fan of him. But the music is so classical that I wrote down, before knowing that, I forgot that he did the score. I wrote down Jerry Goldsmith, and he did the score to Planet of the Apes, correct? Am I right about that?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. But it just sounds like a very classic film in every way, and especially in that stuff, like you said, before the politics, before the war. I'm just a sucker for fish out of water stuff. I recently, in the last couple of years, did the homework and watched all the Star Trek movies, and I love the one with that's the one with the whales, right? Where they're fish out of water.
Yeah, number 4. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Voyage Home. Yep.
like I love that one. I love when people have to deal with stuff like the first Thor. I'm a big fan of Fish Out of Water, so I think that really appeals to me more than anything else.
Yeah, and he is the character we're latching onto, right? He's our point of view character. So that initial confusion of, wait, what is this? What's this deal with the gravity? And then when he finds like the Thark eggs and everything, and just how strange everything is, it's very compelling through that.
Definitely.
And then when you start, especially that whole the sequence later where Mark Strong's character, Matai Shang, the leader of the Therns, which again I'm sure people are like, what? But when he has John Carter prisoner and he's just kind of explaining everything to him, this like long exposition dump, you just kind of feel yourself like, can we get back to like the adventure or hanging out with the Tharks, because that stuff was more fun than this.
Oh, 1000%. You're, like you said, the eyes glazing over at, we get it. We know right away what he's doing, and there's really, it's like a 5-minute scene too. It's long. Yeah, it's long. Not a fan.
That almost feels like studio driven to a certain point, right? Being like, hey, look, you gotta tell people what's going on, and but them not finding a very fluid, natural way to do it.
Well, and that's it. I don't blame the studio for saying that. So getting back to
what happened,
yeah, that's true. It could just be Andrew Stanton being like, we'll put this in here too.
So I definitely do want to draw attention to some of the things I think are strong about this film, because this wasn't a really critically acclaimed film when it came out, but it wasn't a critically reviled film either. Like this was really the kind of definition of a divisive movie, I suppose you'd say.
Yep.
But it seemed like the people who liked it were really ready to come to bat for it, and not too many people were really against it. You know, you didn't see like a lot of hatred for it. And so I just wanted to take a moment before we kind of go into what's not working to highlight some of the things I think are working, besides what we already said about Stanton being able to bring some kind of beautiful visuals to it.
Yeah.
So first of all, let's start with performances and maybe highlight a couple of them. And in particular, I think the real, like I've always said, for me, the real standout here is Lynn Collins as Deja Thoris. So it's the Princess of Mars. I almost said titular Princess of Mars, but that's for the book, not the movie. But man, she shines big time in this film. And I think this is where you get, so this is Stanton, worked on the script also with Michael Chabon, a great author. And they really put the work in to make Deja Thoris a very well-rounded, full character. She's really played in the original books. I mean, they talk about her being very strong and capable, but she's usually just a damsel in distress. And I like that they kind of instantly negate that in this, when there's the scene where he kind of assumes that he needs to protect her, and she instantly proves to be his equal, if not better, in combat. That's
funny. I wrote that down. I was like, Deja gets an I don't need no man moment, but it's handled incredibly well, and it's super fun. And there's it adds this immediate chemistry between the two. And he doesn't fight her on it. He looks at her and is like, all right, maybe I should be following you. And it just works so well. It's just a great intro to her.
And even her introduction in the film is a moment where we find out that she's also one of the smartest, most capable scientists in her society. And like everything we're saying makes it sound like this could be almost too try hard to be like, we're going to make strong female character, right? But they pulled off really well. Like the dialogue is good, but also just her natural kind of charisma and how she plays it. I love that little character moment when we first see her and she's speaking right to the camera and giving the speech about Barsoom. Yeah. And then she actually laughs because she realizes how silly it is. And we find out that she's practicing a speech she's going to have to give to her father and to his other men. And just, you like instantly do fall in love with her. And that's important because this is one of those films that plays on that silly old trope of two characters who fall in love over the course of like 24 hours.
Totally.
But watching this film, I'm just thinking like, there's no like straight male who wouldn't just fall for her and be like, yeah, I'm going to leave my life on Earth for this. This seems good,
And again, she's absolutely stunning. So that, I mean, that helps. But she's just a fully formed, funny, fun. I really want to get back to their chemistry as a whole, because there is constant fuck me eyes. The entire film is just that, and it doesn't feel played up. It doesn't feel. It feels real. Like it really does feel real that these two characters are immediately attached. And again, they're both, I mean, she's gorgeous, but let's be honest, they both are really good looking people. So that helps too.
Although I will say, let me give a little advice to John Carter, right? Because I'm sure he's listening.
Of course.
John Carter, if you have just met Deja Thoris, the Princess of Mars, and you are considering staying on Mars and not trying to get back to Earth anymore because you're in love with her and you're going to marry her and take on this whole new persona on Mars, you might want to first just ask, hey, just to be sure, does your genitals, like, do they match with mine? Because you are a Martian, like, he never does that spot check, and that might have been important.
Yeah, you gotta go into the park and see what's under the dinosaur skirts. You gotta make sure right away.
So she definitely steals the show, but Taylor Kitsch, let's talk about him for a moment. What did you think of him in this?
Okay, so when it starts, I'm like, man, this guy's got immediate charisma. I liked him. He's a good-looking guy. He's definitely the hero of the story. It took me a bit to accept the Batman voice he's doing the whole time. The gruff, I was into it for a bit, and then it started to kind of drag on me. But I think it works especially when he gets to Mars, and it's a little bit better. He also plays kind of, I said before, kind of a fool. Like, not a fool, but that Indiana Jones vibe.
Yeah.
I actually really like that. I really liked if that's a directional thing or that's his take on it or everything in between. It feels like he's playing Indiana Jones. I was really reminded of Harrison Ford, minus the voice thing. The voice thing is definitely one of my negatives, but he feels like that kind of character that he can get shit on, but you're still into.
It's interesting because the character of Riggins on Friday Night Lights was this very tortured character. And so you get a sense like that's what he was kind of known for. And I'm sure that played a big part into why Stanton, because John Carter is a tortured character, especially the way they play him. I believe, actually, if memory serves, the backstory about his family being killed during the war was an invention of Stanton.
Oh, really?
And we'll come back to that because that's another element I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that was clearly like, okay, well, we know Taylor Kitsch can play this. But I'm with you in thinking that I think he's at his best in this film whenever it's asking him to be a little silly. And kind of play the comedy of the situation. There's some great moments when I love the whole thing about when he introduces himself to Tars Tarkas. He says he's from Virginia, but Tars Tarkas thinks Virginia is his name. And just like the slight eye rolls John Carter gives every time they call him Virginia, and just that kind of general like, oh my God, I can't believe what's going on attitude. He's the best in those moments.
And he's less like scared, freaked out. He's more like in the situation and just annoyed.
Yeah. I feel, and but again, this is kind of unfair because this is this guy that suddenly is just coming from a TV show and being like, here, you're now the leading man in this gigantic tentpole, which we're sinking a lot of money into. It's all riding on your shoulders, right? So it's kind of too bad that that's the case, but I feel a little less convinced by him when he has to do those kind of big moments, like when he gives his big speech in the arena. Yeah, it's not the best, right? No. He really excels at smaller little character moments. But overall, I think it is a good lead performance, because I know I saw a lot of people kind of, lay a lot of the blame on him when this came out, and I don't know if I can agree with that.
No, I would. It's the powers that be more than anything else, I think, which is kind of. Do you want to segue into that part of it, or? Well,
just one just a couple more points here. I'd also just point out Willem Dafoe, I think, is a lot of fun. Oh, yeah.
He should. You kind of miss him when he's gone for so much of the movie. You miss that character quite a bit. Yeah,
and I mean the CGI, the mocap, because the actors were on set and they did perform in the mocap suits.
They did the face capture thing with the cameras. That's why it looks so good. And by the way, that's something. It still looks awesome. The CGI, the special effects are phenomenal.
Yeah, it holds up. But I just wanted to clarify how it's not just a voice performance, right? So there are some good performances in here. There's also some slightly disappointing ones. I think kind of, I don't know how you felt about Dominic West as like the one villain, but he's really lackluster. And it's weird because Dominic West, I think, was most known for The Warrior. But I just think of like how over the top he did Jigsaw and Punisher Warzone. I was just about to say that. This is a movie that needed him to bring that energy again. And he's just so like bland in this.
He's extremely boring. He needed to be crazy, fun, kind of psychotic, but he's just a villain cardboard cutout, I would say. Yeah. That's about it.
Yep. And the one last thing I really wanted to highlight is just something, again, these are kind of things I'm thinking of, like, I'm surprised. Well, if the film had been a bigger deal, I think these are all things that would have been talked about more. Yeah. But I really want to highlight Woola as one of the great kind of like sci-fi sidekicks of the past few years.
Oh, yeah.
I think Woola is like, so Woola is the was it like, I think he's got 8 legs or something. He's this gigantic, basically dog creature that is tasked with kind of keeping watch over John Carter. He's just adorable, right?
And very much a Pixar character. Like it's it's Doug from Up. It's this just really adorable, creepy looking character. The way it moves, how fast he goes, the light speed running, like it's just so fun. It's just so fun. It feels like an animated movie at that when he shows up.
Yeah, because Woola comes from the books too, but I think in the books it's just kind of explained, well, it's this gigantic creature that becomes like a loyal pet to Carter. But the filmmakers here are really good at making you kind of instantly fall in love with this creature, because even though you said it is kind of ugly on first glance, they bring a lot of life to the face, and it kind of gives them that like that dumb but loyal dog, kind of personality.
Absolutely.
And he's just so much fun. And the fact that Disney did not think to like merchandise that character in any way is kind of like mind-boggling to me.
They didn't seem to merchandise anything in this movie to try to get off the ground your new Star Wars or whatever the heck they thought this was. It's almost like they didn't have a plan. They just wanted to pump a bunch of money, let this director do whatever he wants, and then see what happens. Like, I don't blame that the movie is made, because I think it's a good concept, but it definitely seems like they chose all the wrong ways of getting it out there.
Well, maybe this is a good time to start talking about that. Aaron, did you have anything else you wanted to say just about the film or the story? Or,
I mean, you're really hitting a lot of the things that I was writing, what I wrote down.
So I think we would both agree, just in general, right? If anyone listening to this has always avoided it because of the reputation of it being a bomb or whatever, we're saying like, no, it's a fun adventure film.
It's a fun adventure film, and also you mentioned the story about with his or the stuff about his wife and kid.
Yeah.
That I wrote down, I put all in caps, just absolute goosebumps. So speaking of edits, we really like the editing in it. The cross-cutting of the editing between when you find out that his wife and child were burned to death in their own home, and he finds their body, and then he gets this, in the present day, he goes all Wolverine berserker rage on the bad Tharks. I can't remember their names, but we'll just call them that way. It's remarkable. The cross-cutting is incredible, and it's really, really ballsy for Disney. You see a wife and child burned to death, and it's not quick. It's not a quick cut. They show it at least twice or 3 times, and he buries them. So it's ballsy. I just thought it was remarkable. I completely forgot about that imagery, and I was like, man, this is not in a Disney movie. That's not, a Marvel film ever.
Do you ever read anything that you wrote in the past and think like, that is a completely different person? What was I thinking?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'll give you a perfect example. So after I watched this again, I went back and looked at the original review I wrote for this back in 2012, when I had a movie blog at that point. And I said in that review that the added backstory of his family dying in the Civil War adds nothing to the film. And I was just like, what was I thinking? Because on this view, I'm totally with you. I thought like it's so emotionally powerful, and that moment you're talking about is also one of the key moments of the film. Like, so well done. And yeah, it does add a lot, and it really kind of explains his character quite well. This idea, like, why is he so resistant to try and help these people and get involved in this combat? It's not just a matter of wanting to get back to Earth. It's also that he's just been so burned on any kind of war.
Pun unintended.
Yeah, you're right. His family was burned. He was not. But yeah, no, it's great, and it is very dark, but it does add a lot.
Probably the standout moment of the film is that moment. You buy into everything that he's either fighting for or resisting. You are all on John Carter's side there.
Where are you on the concept of taking the ring from your dead wife and using it to get engaged to your new space wife?
Your Martian space wife, yes.
Yeah.
It was definitely probably not needed. We got it. It was strange. Again, because these are a little bit of missteps, right? Mm-hmm. You show an incredible scene that shows his grief, and then 30 minutes? No, maybe let's say an hour later. An hour later, he's taking that same ring and giving it to Deja. kind of undercuts what you saw.
Yeah. It certainly just feels weird in the moment.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of that. It just felt icky would be the word.
Yeah, but I guess it's safe to say we both think overall it's a strong movie, right? I don't know if it's not an A plus. I'm not even sure if I'd say it's an A.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think it's a strong B.
I agree with that,
which is fine for this kind of film. And so that I guess leads us to our question of, if we liked it so much and we think it's quite well, why didn't it work, right? What went wrong? And there's actually a lot to talk about here. Even though I like the film, and like I said, I love that Stanton had this passion for this film, that he was so kind of insistent to make it as close to the books as possible. I can respect a lot of that. There is no reason as much money should have been spent on this movie as was. This budget is insane. And you really look at that and you're like, you can't fault Disney for just being like washing their hands of it afterwards, because good Lord.
For people who don't know the budget, it was at the time the largest budget ever for a non-sequel or non-property or whatever. Budget of over $250 million. Production budget. So when you weigh in, you usually have to double a budget, including the marketing cost. So really they needed to make at least $500 million back. They grossed $284 million worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So their losses exceeded upwards of $300 million on this movie. And it sounds like it comes down to a lot of the marketing.
Not just the marketing, but even like before we get into the marketing, we briefly get back to like the history of it, because this is one of those cases, and this is probably a tale we will tell many times on this podcast. But these ideas of kind of regime changes during a movie, right? Because this is a film. So the executive who signed off on this film, the Disney executive, was named Dick Cook. He was the chairman or in charge of the film production wing at that time when Stanton brought it to him, and Dick Cook was the guy that was like, yes, of course, you're the Wall-E, Finding Nemo guy for sure.
Yeah, take my money.
And then he signs off on it, and then he leaves, right? And then this new guy comes on, Rich Ross. Rich Ross, during his tenure at Disney, he actually kind of comes in and puts the kibosh on a really big budget remake of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He steps in and tells Gore Verbinski and Johnny Depp that they have to cut their Lone Ranger budget down, but he does not step in at all on John Carter. He just gives Andrew Stanton completely free reign. And there are stories about how Stanton actually even told the studio, he warned them of what was going to happen, right? He said, just so you know, I don't know how to direct live action. I'm going to be figuring it out on the fly. And I remember in the lead up to this, there was even multiple stories, even before it came out, talking about how there was already concerns because he was kind of approaching directing this the same way you do animated films, which is not the same.
Right.
And he just was always well, we can just keep on tinkering at it and doing a bunch of reshoots and doing scenes over and over. No, that will inflate the budget. And that's certainly what happened. The overall effort is on the screen, but it sounds like it took a lot of work to get there because he kind of was learning all this on the fly. And that's a pretty risky move. If it had paid off, great. It obviously didn't. And then because of this regime change with Dick Cook not being there and Rich Ross coming in, and as we already said, this is also at a point where Disney is now making this kind of effort to move over to purchased IPs, right? They're giving up on they're giving up on new properties. That overall leads, the studio never seemed that invested in this film. We just mentioned how there is no merchandise when it comes out, which is very strange for Disney, because Disney merchandises everything. And I particularly think about how not just Woola, but in a studio that's all about Disney princesses, right? And how strong of a character Deja Thoris is. The fact that they didn't try to market Deja Thoris to young girls
is shocking.
Is such a mistake, I think.
Yeah, and that actually it segues into something I wanted to say about this, why it failed. This movie feels very much a boy movie when it shouldn't feel that much of a boy movie. Do you know? It's kind of jumping off of what you're saying. Deja Thoris is the best character in the movie. Mm-hmm. Bottom line is the best character. She's the best character, and it should have revolved around a lot of marketing with her. And there's just nothing there. It's all about showing John jump, and John with his leather strap on and his abs and his fighting prowess, and it's all about him. it's very, I don't know if this movie really appealed to multiple demographics, so to speak. Something like, I don't want to bring up Avatar a lot, but it's definitely, seeing this movie again after my love for Avatar, it's shown so much of what James Cameron has, maybe a reverse homage, so to speak, for what's in John Carter. That movie's very much, it hits all the demographics. You can bring your girlfriend to that movie and she's gonna love it. It's romantic. She's, you know what I mean. And Neytiri is a phenomenal character in Avatar, but in this movie, it's the marketing really isn't there whatsoever for her. And you're right. I didn't even think about the Disney princess angle. I didn't even think of that.
Well, no, that's where I agree with you in that. I agree that it was certainly pushed as a boy movie, but yeah, the Deja Thor's character is the in to get that other audience, because they should love this character, and they didn't even try it. And that even goes back to the fact that the title of the book is Princess of Mars, right? Mm-hmm. And they decided to go with John Carter. And this is where we get into your marketing thing. So let's talk about a series of mistakes that are made in terms of marketing. So first of all, let's talk about the title.
Yeah.
So the decision is made early on to not call it Princess of Mars. And apparently, I remember reading that part of that decision was that they were worried that the title Princess of Mars would make it sound like a movie for girls.
Right.
And they were like, well, no, this is more of a boy movie. And so I don't know, whatever, right? Like I can see the logic either way of whether it should be Princess of Mars or John Carter of Mars, but it needs to be one of those two.
Absolutely.
And the fact that they took Of Mars off the title is such a mistake, because John Carter, you can't get a more just like kind of nondescript, boring title that tells you nothing, right? John Carter of Mars makes, like, even if you've never heard of the character, which most people hadn't, and again, you can't assume that this is a popular property because people didn't know it. But at least John Carter of Mars, that instantly tells you, like, what? It's like an Earthman's name, but on Mars. Instantly, it's starting to kind of explain the film to you.
That, and it's hitting those kind of those B movie tropes, you know. It's
right.
It rings those bells for you. You're set up for at least somewhat of the world you're getting. Like I said before, getting into the movie when it starts, that prologue is like, what? Like, it is completely out of left field, and then immediately goes back to the past on Earth, and it is so jarring. I can only imagine how many people had no idea what movie they were going to see.
And there are like two stories about this. I don't know if we'll ever know exactly which one is totally right, but one story says that it was Andrew Stanton's decision to take Of Mars off, because he said that he wanted to make the point of how he's only John Carter through most of the film. He becomes John Carter of Mars at the end. And in fact, the title that comes up on the screen at the end of the movie is John Carter of Mars. But yeah, then I've also heard, and the more kind of popular story is that because Mars Needs Moms had bombed, Disney was concerned that movies with Mars in the title would not sell well, and so they wanted Mars to be taken off. Both of those, like, the logic to both of those is stupid, so it doesn't even matter which one is true. It's just so like, again, a lot of what we'll talk about in the show is just how dumb Hollywood can be sometimes, and both of those stories point to that, right? This idea of overthinking something and being like, oh, we can't have princess in the title because that doesn't appeal to girls, but we can't have Mars because Mars Needs Mom failed. Like, what are you talking about? Like, put the right title on this property. Jeez.
Yeah, and it goes to show that they ignore the history of the property even, which I think the marketing didn't address whatsoever. That, hey, this is 100-year-old thing that people should know about. It's the guy who made Tarzan. They should have really leaned into that by calling it something so bland and generic. There's just now there's nothing to connect it. Even for the people that know, like, if I knew what John Carter was when it was coming out, and I could tell my friends, oh yeah, it's based on this thing, John Carter from Mars, then I can get into it. But you're probably gonna sound like a crazy person.
Yeah, well, this is where we get back into the marketing, and I know you wanted to talk a little bit about this, because this again really comes down to where a lot of the blame seems to fall on Stanton's shoulders a little bit here, because apparently he really took over the marketing campaign. So the person who was in charge of marketing at this point for Disney was M.T. Carney. She was actually new in the role, and she had come she was new to the movie industry. She was kind of an outsider who was brought in. She had worked in other kinds of advertising, and Disney brought her in, and apparently she brought a lot of different ideas to understand. But one thing I know we read in an article was that this goes back to Stanton not kind of understanding how typical blockbuster filmmaking works. He didn't start his like production schedule with any kind of exciting footage that could be cut into an early trailer. When they first came to them, everything he'd filmed so far was kind of like just dialogue scenes, and they had nothing to kind of work with. So then they kind of pushed him, can you at least give us something, you know? And then apparently he started putting up a lot of like a fight about M.T. Carney's ideas on the marketing. In particular, Stanton kept saying that he didn't want this movie marketed towards kids because he felt like it was more of an adult film. Mistake number one.
Absolutely.
Right?
Say what you want about George Lucas. He's always said that Star Wars was for kids.
Yes,
and
I know we were saying earlier that kids might be confused by some of this, and that's still true. But that doesn't mean they won't get into it because of all the adventure and the excitement and characters like Woola. There's a lot of movies that are as complicated that kids love, right? Because they can still buy into, you know, other elements of it. So that even goes to like Stanton did not want the trailers to mention that he was the director of Finding Nemo and WALL-E because he was worried that would tell people that this is a kids movie. So he's not even like allowing them to push that. And then, as you just said, he, for whatever reason, he didn't want the trailers to mention anything about John Carter's kind of literary legacy. I don't know what his thinking was in this. I don't know if he felt like he was worried it would seem too old-fashioned, but as you pointed out, that just doesn't give the audience anything to understand, like what is even the point of this, right?
Yeah, there's nothing. There's no backbone.
He initially delivers Disney this initial teaser trailer that's now kind of infamous for how it kind of began the lack of hype for John Carter. The teaser trailer is actually set to Peter Gabriel doing a cover of "The Body Is a Cage" by Arcade Fire. And it's just, we'll post this trailer on our social media. I encourage you right now to go look at it. Look up John Carter teaser. This teaser tells you nothing about what the film is. It's not an exciting teaser. And then when they come to the later like full trailer, the studio again has some ideas and Stanton has his own ideas and he wins. He keeps winning. And one of his big ideas is he wants the trailer set to Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. They kind of raise some issues about that because they say that's a very like kind of old-fashioned, overdone song. Can we try something more modern? And he says no. So yeah, for whatever reason, he keeps fighting these battles, and his decisions are not great.
It's weird though that they just don't overrule him, right? Mm-hmm. Like you hear these stories all the time about studios jumping and getting involved, and the director's going crazy, and I don't know if
because they're like treating him at this point like he's Christopher Nolan or something.
Yeah, and like he's not. I mean, yes, he did do 2 very successful films, so I guess he does have that. Though. Yeah, in a different medium. Mm-hmm. But nobody's stepping in and just being like, you know what, man, it's not. This looks like shit.
Yeah. So then you have these trailers that aren't getting any excitement. Then the studio's not helping because this leadership change, they're not putting any kind of also like additional muscle behind it. When a Disney film comes along and there's no kind of merchandising or marketing blitz behind it, it felt like, I remember when this film came out, it just felt like they'd already given up on it. Mm-hmm. And it is true that will feed into the overall audience perception of the film. Why should the audience be excited if the studio doesn't seem excited? This felt like a movie that was just kind of getting dumped out. It came with some bad buzz, and it felt like the studio was even just like, yeah, we know. You know,
and did they push it out in like March?
Yeah, so I mean, it's just it was kind of unfortunately destined to fail based on all this stuff. I think it didn't have much of a chance. You know, it wasn't treated like a big property. This is the kind of film that, for everything we just said about how it's there's some flaws to it and everything, but I think this is a movie that if you were the Disney and you treated this movie like it was the Avengers or something, and that's why it wasn't a summer release, right? They weren't going to compete it against the Avengers. But if you treated it with that same level, I don't even want to say, it seems mean to say you're tricking people into going to see it, but you could trick this movie into being a big hit for sure. Yeah. They just didn't care. They were like, I think they were like ready to wash their hands of it.
Yeah, they didn't care. They're moving on to Star Wars soon, you know, behind the scenes.
The new people in charge, this wasn't their project, you know.
So it's like the ugly stepchild of the Disney filmography at this point. Which actually, before when we said about, I keep mentioning that Star Wars was about to be purchased. Do you think that this was? Were they hedging their bets with this movie? Like, this movie was in the works for so long. Do you wonder if this took off? Like, would they have rushed to Star Wars, or do you think they needed to recoup something?
I think it's kind of more the other way, where you wonder, like, that Star Wars deal, like, again, when do you think they really started talking to Lucas about that? And at that point, we know that, like, the leadership had already changed at Disney, and they're looking at this thing like, well, we're about to get Star Wars. Do we really need this other, like, space adventure franchise? That's a good point. Are we just, like, cannibalizing ourselves at that point? And that might be, not to get all conspiracy theory about it, but maybe they were kind of just like, yeah, let's let John Carter fail because there's no room for both of these here. Yeah.
I'm currently crafting my tinfoil hat as you speak.
So at the time when this came out, this is actually fairly interesting too, and it's another thing I would encourage people to check. So John Carter fans, because there is obviously a fandom for this character, they could kind of see the writing on the wall in the run up to this being released, and they were getting very frustrated by the marketing or lack thereof, and the stories they were hearing about how Disney already seemed to have given up on it. And one fan cut his own trailer of the film and put it online that is so much better than anything Disney and Stanton actually delivered. And it did exactly what we were just talking about. They put up the text that says, from Andrew Stanton, director of Finding Nemo and WALL-E. And then to your point, it brings up a text that says, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but it says something like, the epic adventure that influenced 100 years of filmmaking. It's like, we're right there. Just that one little line, right? Like, it tells people like, oh, this is the story. Because that's the other thing we didn't even mention, but I think it goes without saying. The other big hurdle this film was up against is coming out in 2012. It's coming out after decades of things that it had influenced. And it just suddenly looks like, oh, we've seen this before. You mentioned like Avatar, like, yep, it looks like, oh, this is like just a ripoff of everything. And that's the irony of it, right? I remember people saying that, like, doesn't that just look like this thing? It's like, yeah, it does, because that thing was based on John Carter. But they didn't even try to, like, fight that perception or explain that, no, this is the original version, which I think could have at least got some mainstream interest, right? Oh, that's the original version of these stories. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's where this all came from.
No attempt, you know.
Yeah, all the things we know and love that are like cemented in film lore, everything that we love is come from this type of story, the classic hero's journey.
Yeah.
It was funny because even today I was talking at work to a friend being like, oh yeah, I watched John Carter yesterday for the first time and since its release for our podcast today. And she immediately goes, oh, I would never watch that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, why? And she goes, well, it just looks stupid. It always looks stupid. And I'm like, well, do you like Avatar? Yeah. Do you like so-and-so? Yeah. This? Yeah. I was like, okay, you like John Carter. Like, it's don't be fooled by the almost 10 years at this point of negativity. It is a genuinely good movie, just problematically released to the people.
Yeah, and that confusion and like kind of just like we don't care element even continues into like the like later releases of it. So like when it comes to video, it actually does fairly well on video. But it's funny, I was looking at my Blu-ray of it, and it's got this atrocious like ugly cover, and it's still. So I really feel like they should just pull to Live Die Repeat and change the title to John Carter of Mars on the video release. But they don't. So the Blu-ray is just titled Disney John Carter. But it's really funny because, and I'm gonna post a picture of this on our social media. The Blu-ray actually, they stuck a red sticker on the cover that says "A warrior on Earth becomes a hero on Mars," and it's like, what's with this sticker?
Bizarre.
Like someone at the last minute was like, oh yeah, I guess maybe we should tell people this is that one about the guy on Mars or something. Let's just put a sticker on there. It's so strange.
It's again, Hollywood is stupid. I'm convinced Hollywood is stupid. And even when it comes down to you saying that the ugly case, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's good art of this movie. I think the teaser poster was nice, right? And it's just use that. Mm-hmm. Use that. Like, stop putting this bullshit Photoshop crap onto these cases. But again, Hollywood.
Yeah, there was like a pretty neat poster for it where he was like riding one of those like big beasts on Mars and everything. And then like the Blu-ray cover is like a bad like picture of him and then another picture of him in the background fighting the giant white apes. So it makes it look like it's about like him and his twin brother, apparently. Deja Thoris not on the cover at all, which is again like, what are you doing? You know,
that surprises me. Because I don't own the Blu-ray. I watched it on Disney Plus. Mm-hmm. And is that a plug? Oh.
Well, if it is, come on, Disney. Let's.
Yeah. Hey, we're talking good things about your movie. We're actually trying to get people to watch it again, rediscover it.
I also just think the last thing I'll say about this point, and this is one of those things that just can't be helped, but I think it is a film that just came out in the wrong era in a certain sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think about if this had come out in like the 80s and how it would have been the kind of movie that I'm not even saying it necessarily would have been a hit in the 80s in the theaters, but what would have happened in the 80s is then it would have had such a shelf life on video, and then it would have played on cable all the time. Because I was thinking about how this movie to me is very indicative of things like The Neverending Story,
Mm-hmm.
or Excalibur, Flash Gordon, these films that
the Saturday morning serials.
Some of them are good, some of them are not that great, but they all were on all the time, and an entire generation of kids grew up, and just because they would see them on TV constantly, they were convinced they were good. And there's such strong nostalgia for those things now, right? And if this movie clearly would have been one of those, but it came out in an era where once the movie leaves theaters, that's it. Like, it gets put on Blu-ray, sure, but the rental market was already dying off.
Mm-hmm.
There was no Disney Plus back then, so it didn't go right into a streaming service. It's just forgotten about, and it has no chance of really getting a strong second life.
Well, and also we mentioned it came out the year of the Avengers. Yeah. And I think that in general completely overtook it. There's no conversation about this movie, regardless of it. Because again, we said the reception was fairly critically positive. But a couple months later, Avengers comes out, and oh my God, it worked. And who gives a shit about John Carter anymore? The Avengers are what we're looking at. We're waiting for this. So yeah, I think it completely overshadowed by so many factors, dumped like Disney couldn't get rid of it fast enough. And it's a real shame because it's good. It's a good movie. It's fun. Yeah, and you're so right. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say you're so right about it airing like an afternoon on cable. That's the reason why I love this type of movie. That's the reason why I like this high concept fantasy. The Swords and Sandals epic, as most people know. They were just on. They were on TBS. They were on Superstation. I just would watch them on repeat. We used to, at the time, we used to record them onto VHS. And, like me and my brother used to watch this stuff all the time. So no wonder we are tuned in, or I guess dialed into something like this, regardless of its flaws.
Yeah, ultimately, though, for all the issues about it, I don't know if I would want to change anything about it, because the thing is, so it actually, the nice thing about this film is it does have a sequel setup, but it tells a fairly complete story. It ends with the kind of sequel setup, which is the kind of the one that is not frustrating to not necessarily have the next chapter, right? Obviously I wish they had been able to make more, but you can kind of figure out the rest of the story to yourself, right? It ends in just the right way. We're like, oh, I get it.
That's funny you say that, because I actually wrote that down, being like, I forgot that he was sent back. So again, he throws away his little medallion or whatever, right? His little transport thing. And then Mark Strong sends him back to Earth. And I forgot that he's sent back against his will. And for 10 years, he tries to get back. Now, I loved all that. And for the reasons that you're saying, it's not just like filmmaking now, like on to the next. Like, we'll wait to see how he gets back. But I would say it kind of, I don't know, like it almost needs, it gets resolved in 5 minutes. He gets sent back to Earth, and in 5 minutes later, he's back on Mars, so, supposedly, Yeah. And in a weird way, I was thinking maybe if that didn't happen, people would be clamoring to see the next one.
Well, no, they wouldn't. That's my point, though. That's what I'm saying. That's where I kind of agree with you, but that's why I'm saying I'm glad it happens that way, because since there is no sequel, I agree that the resolution seems so fast.
Yeah.
But it allows you to be like, oh, okay, well, at least this movie has an ending that works thematically.
I guess, but when you're sitting there and it happens and you're like, oh my god, he just got married. Like, what the hell? Like, he can't get back to Deja. Like, how's this gonna work? What's going on? And then 5 minutes, he's back.
Yeah. Well, it's like you can clearly see where the next movie would have instantly started, right? Of him being back and like showing up, because obviously we see time passes differently. So he would have been like, how long would he have been missing from Mars? And he probably would have shown up in a different area. That's actually what happens in the book. When he in the second novel, it's the same thing. He has to go back, and he arrives in a different area of the planet and has to find his way back to her. But yeah, I think it ends well. And to what I was just saying too about why I wouldn't change anything. for all of the issues we were just talking about with Stanton, right? Like, I think a lot of the failure ultimately falls on him, but it's clear he loved this character. And ultimately, if we don't get any sequels, there is something to be said for the fact that he did make this one really strong John Carter movie. And if that's all this property ever gets, I'm glad it was this film, right?
Yeah.
Because I think of that like 80s Tom Cruise version, and it might have been cool, but I bet you that's a version that would have been like studio noted to death, right? So it's almost like everything that went wrong about this film and everything that led to its failure is also why it ended up kind of working as a movie, if that makes any sense. Like, he was able to actually make the John Carter movie I think fans wanted to see. And so ultimately this film will stand the test of time and be watched by tens of people over the next 100 years. They'll get the John Carter movie that probably Burroughs would have liked to have seen, right? I guess there's something to be said for that. It's a small victory, and it's not this like dumb Hollywoodized version of it.
It's almost, it's memorable for its disaster, but also for it sticking to its guns. It's earnest. I mean. It's earnest. It did exactly what it set out to do. Andrew Stanton got to make the movie he wanted to make.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of things we're talking about, there are things that normally we always like really support. When a filmmaker puts his foot down and says, "No, I'm not going to cast the big star of the moment. I'm going to cast the actors that are appropriate, and I'm going to try and keep this as close to the book as possible." Like, that's all fairly admirable. So I can't I don't want to shit on it too much. It's just a fact of it didn't. Then he made some other decisions that also torpedoed it all. So it's a complicated film, but I understand its failure.
And I hope it does stand the test of time and people can rediscover it and look back on it fondly. Like, I'd rather that than just remember it for, again, John Cartering itself, Yeah.
I mean, I think with it being on Disney Plus, I think hopefully the lasting legacy of it now will be a generation of people watching it and going, well, that's better than I heard,
That should be in the poster.
So let's talk about what could have been. So we know Stanton had like a roadmap in place. He had the idea to make the next two films, make this a trilogy. There were 11 novels, but most fans of the property and of the character really latch on to the first three, which are Princess of Mars, which this was an adaptation of, and then God of Mars or Gods of Mars and Warlord of Mars. And that's what Stanton intended to adapt, because some of the other novels don't even feature John Carter as the main character anymore. As the narrative continues, him and Deja actually have kids, and the son becomes a main character in one of the books, and then later the daughter is a main character. And then you actually get into, once you get into later ones, you're talking about John Carter's granddaughter. So Stanton was just kind of concentrating on these first three. And you can look at those and understand what the sequels would have been to a certain degree. Like, obviously it would have changed things here and there, but they're primarily about the continuing battle of John Carter versus the race of Therns. And they're introduced this other race, which were called in the books the Black Pirates. I don't think Disney would have gone along with that. But they're this other subset of Martians. And actually, as you keep on going, the books would reveal all these different kind of species on Mars. So there's like a lot of potential for more characters.
For sure.
More kind of deviations. This is also the kind of thing where I didn't really kind of speculate too much about what hypothetical sequels would have been, because they simply would have been adaptations of these books. But in a world where this really takes off, there's no reason that you don't also just give Deja Thoris her own film, right? She seems like she totally feels like a character that can support her own. And in fact, in like whatever John Carter's lasting impact right now in the entertainment landscape is as a comic book character primarily. And I think it's Dynamite that has the rights to the characters, and they've been publishing a Deja Thoris comic for the last few years. They've kind of really put the focus on her, and that makes sense to me in a way that I'm sure you could have seen with this as well.
I definitely was a thought that, going forward, we'd see more of her, just more of a standalone type of vibe from her perspective. Like, even because again, I almost stayed away from. It's funny, you did the opposite thing that I did. I did more of like, spitball some sequel ideas.
Okay.
I didn't really know what the next books were. I kind of wanted to go in not knowing, right?
Sure.
And so I was thinking, one would be, even if it's going to be a trilogy, the second movie is Deja Thoris, what happened in that 10 years. Mm-hmm. I think that could have totally been fun to see. Or you do the whole, when John leaves the first movie and he comes back, like, it's not all gravy. You know, like, again, I don't know the details of the sequels, but when John goes back to Mars, like, maybe it's horrible. You know, like, maybe Dejah Thoris is like filled with grief, anger. He's abandoned her. She becomes sort of almost a villain of the piece, but like one of those great villains, like a Cersei. You know, something. I don't know. I was just spitballing little things like that.
Well, this is why I respect that Andrew Stanton was trying to stay so close to the books. Because I picture a world where another studio is doing this, or other filmmakers who look at this and say, okay, we eventually got to get Dejah Thoris to come to Earth, right? We got to get this
totally.
The Martians end up attacking Earth and John Carter has to defend his home planet, right? And like, I don't think Stanton would have ever done that, but I could see other versions of this totally heading in that direction.
I also was thinking, like, maybe through the ninth ray and all that mystical stuff, John and Dejah Thoris like going to different planets. And then every new movie is, John Carter of insert planet name here, and discovering what kind of was going on over there. That would be interesting. That'd be fun, but probably not going to happen.
No. Also, I think it's safe to say if this had been a huge hit, we'd probably see theme park attractions of this at Disney World. There's so much potential there. That's kind of the shame of it, right? You look at this and you can see like what some of the cool like interactive rides could be, or even just like lands and setups.
Well, especially now, like with the VR, or sorry, the I guess just the VR technology, how the Star Wars ride has done its thing. It's all screens, right? And it would be incredible. Honestly, it would be Avatar World.
Yeah,
like I can easily see that. Petting zoos, and you pet your little Woolahs, and
there would definitely be Woolah dolls all over,
everywhere.
And then I also think I'm actually I'm kind of surprised that after this film, and again, maybe it's just because not enough people saw it, but one of the first things I remember saying walking out of the theater, because I was so impressed with Lynn Collins as Dejah Thoris, was saying, man, if they ever make a Wonder Woman movie, there's your actress, right? Because that basically was Wonder Woman in that film. And I never even heard her name come up in the conversation. And in fact, I just feel like Lynn Collins kind of, and again, it's a byproduct of this movie bombing. When we talk about what could have been, Taylor Kitsch and Lynn Collins in a version of a world where this is a huge hit, I think would have really come out of this as strong kind of stars. And instead, it really I think it hurt them both quite a bit. And that's too bad. And especially with her, I'm surprised she didn't. I want to see her play more roles like this. And I feel like she kind of retreated to TV a little bit after this.
Where did she end up, really?
I don't know. I didn't look too deep into it. I think she's got some supporting roles in some other films, and she's done some TV work. But
yeah, it's a shame when you do you kind of give it your all, right? And you think you're getting into this big mega blockbuster in Disney. Like, that must be one of the greatest calls ever. I can't imagine what actors go through when that happens. They get the call that they're going to be in fucking John Carter. It's going to be it's going to be the new Star Wars.
Well, just think about Taylor Kitsch's 2012, right? So he does John Carter, and everything I've read from him since, where he still loves this, right? He's very defensive about it, because he says, he's like, we poured our heart into it. It didn't catch on, but we love the film we made. I wish I could have done more. But then, so he has to like bear that, because it was such an infamous bomb at the time, and to the point where Rich Ross, that executive we talked about, actually steps down from his position in the fallout of it, kind of saying like, I screwed up. I shouldn't have allowed this film to lose this much money for us. And so Taylor Kitsch is dealing with that, and then later that summer, Battleship comes out and is another infamous bomb, right? Yeah. That also gets a lot of bad negative press. And also another movie that everybody's like, oh, it's just like Transformers. It's just like something else. So why would I go see that? Yeah. And then the last thing I would say is, because this is where I'll put on my little speculative hat a little bit. I think if this movie had hit, the most natural like result of it would have been more films like this. And in that, what I mean is, I wouldn't have been surprised if we'd gotten a new Flash Gordon movie. Totally. Yep. A new Buck Rogers. Doc Savage is another famous pulp hero that Hollywood has been trying to do for years. It would have been greenlit like the next weekend if this movie had hit, right? Because people would say like, oh, people like these old pulp heroes. We would have seen like a resurrection of that. There's really no room for that in a crowded marketplace of nothing but superhero films now. But if this movie had been a big deal, they would have tried, right? Absolutely. It's a real shame that didn't happen. We don't really see this stuff anymore. It's fun. It's pulpy, you know? Yeah, these big, like, even arguably sloppy but ambitious space epics, and like you said, sword sandal adventure type films, whether they're like coming from old actual pulp source material or just kind of being made up. Like, it kind of reminds, it's like another film that is reminiscent of it is but a more like original take is Jupiter Ascending.
Oh yeah,
which is another one I think we'll talk about on here.
Yeah,
sometimes it's just that how big that ambition is, you know. And in an era where everything is like kind of more of a safe bet now. That's one thing you can say about John Carter is it wasn't a safe bet.
No.
And it didn't pay off.
At all.
But kudos to all of them for thinking it would and for giving it the old college try, I guess.
And that's kind of like, I mean, I'm thinking to how we're up and having a good time and fun during our episode 0, and this one's almost a little bit more of that memorial for the movie, you know?
Yeah.
We're not shitting on it. We're not making cracking wise, as the kids say. It's just, you know, we're genuinely bummed that this movie didn't do well, because it's good and it's fun, and I feel like I'm rambling, but
no, I think if people want to start keeping score here, the first episode is we'll mark this one down in unfortunate loss.
Totally.
This is one we wish would have worked, and again, I understand why it didn't, and I'm not going to say it shouldn't have failed, because they made a lot of big mistakes. But just viewing the film on its own deserved better. It's a film that deserves sequels. That's what I'll say. Yeah,
I definitely love movies like this, and I want more movies like this. And if they crash and burn, it sucks, but it's I think it's good to have movies like this.
Mm-hmm. I also, just to quickly go back to my Taylor Kitsch thing, because I find this very funny, is I'm sorry, I feel bad for the guy. I do. I like Taylor Kitsch.
Yeah,
I keep hoping for better things for him. But there is something darkly funny about the fact that after the 1-2 punch of John Carter and Battleship, I remember just being like, God, that poor guy. And then it was like, well, wait, he just got cast in season 2 of True Detective, the biggest TV hit in years. What a comeback. And then it turned out to be season 2 of True Detective. And I was like, this guy cannot catch a break.
Unreal. Yeah. It's funny, too, because you say 1-2 punch, but we forget that he was Gambit in X-Men Origins Wolverine. And, he's not had the best luck. Yeah. Although I'll also say, like, I think he's one of the better things in that movie. I actually thought he was decent as Gambit. A movie that's plagued with horrible decision making, he's decent. Yeah. So this was one that we're a little sad about. We'll see if that continues with our next episode. Do you want to talk about what's to come? Yeah, for sure. Next, I guess in 2 weeks from now, we're gonna watch Ghostbusters 2016. So the Paul Feig reboot. Yeah. And we're looking forward to watching that one. And a disclaimer about that one too. We wanted to say kind of right off the top. We wanted that movie to work. Yeah. We were all on board for that movie. If you heard that we're doing that episode and you're excited, you're like, oh man, I can't wait to join with these guys as they crap on this female Ghostbusters movie, you're barking up the wrong tree, because that's not where we're coming from. Not to talk about how our feelings on how it turned out, but we were not those guys. I was very excited for that idea. Same. Actually. Yeah. Love the cast, love the director. I'm a big fan of his filmography, and we'll get into it next episode, but suffice to say, we were rooting for that movie from the beginning. So keep your Gamergate and Ghost Bros crap out of here. Yeah, fuck off with that shit. We don't want to hear. But that's the film we'll be looking at next time. So if you'd like to join along with us in the conversation, go ahead and give that a watch. Ghostbusters Answer the Call, I believe. Isn't that one where they like renamed it for a video? They did. They lived, died, repeated it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. John Carter should have taken some notes. Yeah. I don't know. Was Answer the Call just a sticker that they put on there like this one was? Yeah. So thanks for listening to this one. Go to our description of our bio to see where you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Our letterboxds are on there, so you can see a little bit more of a glimpse into what we like and what we don't like. And we really hope you'll join us for next episode. Yeah, and if you have Disney Plus, go watch John Carter, for God's sakes. Yeah, it's good. Come on. And if you know Taylor Kitsch, give him a nice hug next time you see him. Yeah, well, not during the pandemic, but blow him a kiss.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
All
not
right.
that either. You can't even blow it to him. You can't.
Yeah, no, just give him a nice, respectful nod, like a.
Yeah, but make sure you're wearing the mask. So make sure you smile with your eyes and do a little casual head nod.
That's right. All right, we'll see you guys next time.